Welcome to the Gearhead Fellowship channel, where today we are going to be diving into the electronics to get this transmission to lock up, and we'll be going through how the torque converter clutch solenoid works inside the transmission. Stick around. The 204R transmission is nowhere near as complicated as some of the electronically controlled transmissions like the 4L80E, 4L60E transmissions, where they use electronic solenoids to shift the valves or the things around inside the valve body. The only electronic part of the 204R is if you have lockup, and all that's controlled through a simple 12-volt solenoid. So this solenoid is an example of that, and it goes right down here into the transmission. It actually goes through the front of the case, and let me move the camera so you can see it. You can see right down in here, but you're looking up into the lockup section of the pump with the retaining ring and everything. So that's the valve assembly that we put in our pump for the lockup circuit. So that's where the solenoid goes down into, and it simply bolts down into place like so into these standoff studs. And once that gets bolted into place, lube that up, you slide it down into the hole, and get it bolted into place. Then you come over and plug in your connectors into your case connector on the side of the transmission, as you can see I've got down there. So all this solenoid requires to work is 12 volts. It's 12 volts, and you ground out the circuit, and you end up locking the converter up. Basically, under normal conditions, this is exhausting fluid from the lockup circuit, allowing the lockup valve to just keep exhausting from the converter. And then when you send 12 volts to it, this solenoid is going to prevent the exhausting of the lockup fluid, and it's going to continue to allow pump pressure to go to the converter. And when that happens, the converter clutch is going to apply. And so all you need to do is then drop 12 volts off of that, and the converter clutch is going to release. So all you've got to do really is send 12 volts to this solenoid or not, and that'll give you your lockup clutch. Otherwise, there's nothing else electronic in the transmission. It can be a little daunting on trying to figure out how you want to set up your electronic circuit for your lockup clutch and your torque converter. The factories use an electronic control module. A lot of times they might encompass a speed switch, throttle position switch, ECM, all these different types of things that would be utilized in the control module, and we're nowhere near as complicated as far as that's concerned with the aftermarket. So as far as the circuit goes, remember the lockup solenoid only requires 12 volts. So all you need to do is complete the circuit at 12 volts, and this thing's going to actuate. And because of the way the transmission is designed, it's either going to apply hydraulic fluid and not release it from the converter, or it's going to release it, which means you're either going to have lockup or... So really the decision you have to make is, how are you going to set up your circuit? What do you want to kick your lockup in or off, on or off? So what do you want to lock the converter up, and how do you want to unlock the converter? And so what I'm going to elect to do here is only apply 12 volts to the circuit when I want to through the push button of a momentary switch. And how we're going to do that is actually we're going to put 12 volts to a small fuse block, which I got right here. I just got it because I needed further upgrades and such. So we got a simple fuse block from Summit, about 20 bucks. We'll run one circuit right now, 12 volts off the alternator, to make this circuit live. Out of the fuse block, we're going to come to this brake light switch, which, if you're not familiar, this goes up around your brake pedal, and basically when you are off the brakes and your pedal is pulled up, it's basically going to push that plunger in right there, and that's going to turn your brake lights off, and it's going to allow 12 volts to flow through these other terminals. It's used a lot of times in either torque converter, clutch lockup, or cruise control. And then when you push your foot on the brake pedal, that plunger releases with the way the pedal's designed, and you stop the flow of 12 volts to the circuit, which then will unlock the converter or turn your cruise control off, or whatever the case may be. So we're going to utilize that. Then we're going to come out of there into a master on-off switch, which I'll have mounted on the dash. Come off the master on-off switch, the two branches, actually one's going to go to a solenoid, the other one's going to come to my momentary switch on my shifter. And it'll, off my solenoid, I'm also going to have an armed light, which I don't have displayed here. Coming off of my solenoid, I'm going to run the wires down and to my lockup solenoid inside my transmission through a set of pigtails and connectors. And so when I activate my momentary switch, I'm going to close the relay. It's going to send voltage across and send it to the solenoid. The solenoid's going to close. It's going to block the pressure, and it's going to lock the converter up. At that point, we're going to bring the ground right back out of the transmission, bring it back up through an engaged light, which then will take care of the engage function. And so that's how the converter system is really going to work as far as lockup is concerned. How it works in a lot of other ways, in the factory, aside from the ECM, they'll use this type of switch, which is like a third or fourth gear pressure switch. And this switch will get mounted in the valve body. Let me show you where the pressure switch mounts. So the fourth gear pressure switch basically goes right here in the valve body, and it would sit right down in here like this. You just take this plug out and you could install that. And this switch basically would provide the ground for your torque converter lockup. So if this switch, if everything was telling that lockup converter to lock up, and this switch was not made, wasn't seeing pressure in fourth gear, converter clutch wouldn't lock up. That's why a lot of times from your factories it's set up to only lock up in third or fourth gears. I'm setting mine up to lock up whenever I tell it to. I'm going to lock mine up with my on-off switch on my shifter, and then I'm going to disengage it with my brake pedal or my master switch. We now have all the electrical secured for the bottom of the transmission with the TCC solenoid and the pigtail that comes right outside. You can see the TCC solenoid mounted in here, secured down, the wiring's run low, profile, clamped here with some insulators, and then clamped also here. You want to really be making sure that none of this wiring gets in the way of any moving parts. So we're going down through there. And also the parking pawl shaft, which is right here. You really want to make sure that none of that wiring gets involved with that. So we've got it all connected up down to our pigtail connector. See, I've already marked my pigtail connector, indicating which side's going to be my hot 12 volts coming in and which side's going to be my ground coming out. So the wiring's all into the bottom of the transmission. Now all we have to do is put the filter in place and then put the pan on. So here we've got our filter, and we've lubed up our sealing ring there, and we'll slide that right down into the transmission. And we're going to do another video later on, because this filter, as you can see, is solid on the bottom, and it's actually pulling the oil in between the valve body and the filter itself, and that's kind of a choke point for the 200 and the way it's designed. So we're going to be doing another video on a new pan that I'm going to get after I get the transmission broke in and everything, where it actually has an aluminum pan as well as a bottom pickup like the 700R4 transmission has. So we've got our pan together, got our gasket all in place and glued on, and we'll go ahead and put that down in place. Well, that's it for this episode. Hopefully you enjoyed the part of getting the torque converter clutch solenoid wiring set up and everything inside the transmission. It could be a pretty daunting task for some folks, but when you think it through, things get a lot easier. We have a few little minor details to wrap up, but for the most part, that's the transmission rebuild. We've done everything from the pump all the way to the tail shaft, changed the internals out, put in billet internal parts, all new frictions and steels, upgraded high performance, high pressure system, etc. Pro Street servo. Everything's been done. We got a few last minutes to torque the bolts on the pan, and I've got to figure out where to plug up where my throttle valve cable goes, because with the full manual valve body we don't need that. So we'll tidy up those last minutes, and then it's getting the car ready for the transmission to go in. We gotta set the converter up and get it all put into the front of the transmission, and I'm not doing any of that until I have the transmission just about ready to go up under the car. So for right now, appreciate you joining us. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you like what you saw, click the like button, give me a comment, tell me what you think. Give me some ideas if you'd like to see some other things done or have any questions about anything that we've covered. And if you want to see some more stuff coming down the pipe, click subscribe, and you'll be able to see the newest videos that are coming out from Gearhead Fellowship. Once again, thanks for joining us, and it's time for me to go fight some flywheel bolts right now. Thanks a lot.